My husband left me at the bus stop in the storm, but he never imagined what would happen next when my helicopter landed. I was standing there, drenched, shivering, and watching his taillights disappear into the pouring rain. I couldn't believe he could be so cruel. One minute we were arguing over something small, and the next he had just driven off, leaving me completely alone. The wind cut through my coat, and every drop of rain felt like a reminder of how cold and distant he had become. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, because this was the night everything changed, and I promise it's a story you'll want to hear all the way through. At first, I just stood there, hoping he would turn around, that maybe it had all been a terrible mistake. But I quickly realized he wasn't coming back. My hands were numb, my hair plastered to my face, and I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How could someone you loved so deeply just leave you like this? It wasn't just the storm outside. It was the storm inside me, the one that had been brewing for months. Our marriage had been falling apart, slowly, almost invisibly, and this moment made everything painfully clear. I thought about the promises we had made, the dreams we shared, and how all of it seemed to vanish the moment he decided I wasn't worth helping. He had been distant for weeks, dismissing my ideas, ignoring my questions, and hiding parts of his life. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but the rain muffled my voice, and my fear held me frozen. I realized that this was the breaking point, the moment where I had to see the truth for myself. And then, as if fate itself had decided to intervene, I saw a bright light cutting through the gray storm. My cousin Ronan, flying his helicopter nearby, spotted me. Within moments, he had landed safely and opened the door. In the blink of an eye, I went from being soaked and abandoned to being lifted above the rain, safe, warm, and finally in control again. That night, I learned something important. Sometimes the people you think will protect you are the ones who hurt you the most, and sometimes help comes from the places you least expect. I still remember standing there in the helicopter, watching Clayton's car disappear completely, realizing that everything in my life was about to change. I wasn't just escaping the storm outside. I was escaping the storm inside my marriage. And in that moment, I knew I would never let anyone leave me stranded again. This was only the beginning. I still remember the first time I met Clayton. He had this way of making the world feel brighter, like everything was possible if you were with him. He was confident, ambitious, and charming in a way that made me believe he genuinely cared. I was young, full of hope, and completely taken in by the way he made me feel like I was the only person that mattered. Before long, we were inseparable, and when he proposed, it felt like a dream come true. I imagined a life full of laughter, love, and shared adventures. We married quickly. I put my own plans and ambitions aside, thinking we were building something extraordinary together. I gave up opportunities, moved cities, and focused entirely on supporting him, convinced that our love and his drive would carry us both forward. At first, everything seemed perfect. Clayton was attentive, affectionate, and praised my support. I thought I had found someone who would always have my back. But slowly, things started to shift. He became harder to reach, often preoccupied with work, or at least that's what he said. His smiles became rarer, and his compliments turned into criticisms disguised as jokes. I found myself walking on eggshells, unsure of how to bring up anything without facing a cold response or a dismissive comment. Nights out with friends became awkward, and my voice in our conversations seemed smaller, quieter, like it didn't matter. Then came the lies. Small at first, he said he was at a meeting, but later I noticed inconsistencies in his stories. A lingering smell of perfume I didn't recognize, late-night texts he tried to hide. I told myself I was imagining things, hoping to preserve the life I had built around him. He never admitted anything, and I didn't have proof, so I kept quiet, believing I could overlook the doubts and stay loyal. I remember feeling confused and frustrated, trapped between love and suspicion. I still wanted to trust him, even as I felt myself being pushed aside emotionally. The man who once promised the world now seemed distant, his attention focused elsewhere. I gave everything I had to our marriage, only to find that the foundation I thought was strong was quietly cracking. Looking back, the signs were there all along. Late nights at work, unexplained absences, small lies I chose to ignore. They were warning signals I didn't want to acknowledge. I wanted to believe in our perfect beginning, but it was already starting to unravel beneath the surface. That was the moment I realized that love alone wasn't enough when trust starts to fade. By the time I noticed the depth of his coldness, the damage was already done. I had given my heart fully, but Clayton's world had slowly shifted away from me. And though I didn't know it yet, that perfect beginning I once believed in was just the first chapter of a story that would soon demand a reckoning. Things began to feel different between us, though I didn't want to admit it at first. Clayton wasn't the same man I had married. He grew distant, almost like a stranger living in my home. Conversations that used to be warm and easy now felt forced, and I constantly wondered if I had done something wrong. His words became sharp, often disguised as jokes, but the sting was real. Every suggestion I made, every idea I tried to share, was met with eye rolls or dismissive comments. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was imagining the tension, but deep down, I knew something had changed. Little things began to stand out. Money seemed to disappear from our accounts without explanation. I noticed a perfume I didn't recognize on his clothes and shirts folded differently than before. His phone was always face down, and he guarded it more than he ever had. Whenever I asked simple questions, he would brush them off or tell me I was overthinking. I wanted to trust him, but every day the evidence, or at least the hints, made it harder to ignore that something was wrong. The emotional distance was worse than the small lies. He would mock my thoughts, turning my efforts to communicate into moments of shame. He questioned my judgment in front of others, sometimes subtly, sometimes with a sharpness that left me hurt and silent. Slowly, I felt myself retreating, shrinking to avoid his criticism. Friends started noticing my absence. I stopped calling them as often, afraid they might see the cracks in my life I didn't want anyone else to see. I was trapped in a world where I had to be careful with every word, every glance, every action. I couldn't help but replay moments in my head. The late nights he claimed were for work, the sudden enthusiasm for events that didn't include me, the secretive text messages he would quickly hide. Everything was starting to paint a picture I didn't want to see. I told myself it might be nothing, that I was being paranoid, but a nagging feeling in my chest refused to let me rest. The love I had felt so completely was being replaced with suspicion, anxiety, and a quiet fear I didn't know how to shake. Even with all these signs, I had no proof. I kept searching for reassurance in his behavior, in his explanations, in the life we were supposed to be building together. But each excuse, each vague answer, only made the distance between us grow. What had once felt like partnership now felt like a performance, with me trying desperately to hold on to the man I knew, while he slipped further away. I also started noticing patterns I had ignored before. Conversations would end abruptly if I asked about his whereabouts. He avoided social events we were supposed to attend together, sometimes citing sudden work emergencies. I began to feel invisible in my own home. The warmth and laughter that had marked the start of our marriage were replaced by a tense, silent atmosphere. I realized I was living with someone who had changed without telling me, and the trust we had built was eroding in ways I couldn't fix by myself. By the time I started connecting all the small inconsistencies, a painful thought took hold. Clayton was keeping secrets, and they weren't harmless. The idea that he might be cheating crept in, persistent and unsettling. I had no solid proof yet, but the evidence was piling up in subtle ways, and I couldn't ignore the pattern any longer. I felt trapped between denial and realization, trying to convince myself it wasn't happening while knowing deep down it probably was. That's when the cracks stopped being small. They had started to widen into canyons, and I had no choice but to prepare myself for the truth I might soon have to face. The rain was relentless, drumming against my coat and soaking me to the bone. My hair clung to my face, my shoes squelched with every step, and the wind whipped around me like it wanted to push me off the curb. I kept staring at the road, hoping to see Clayton turn back, but there was only darkness and the blur of headlights fading in the distance. I called his name, my voice barely audible over the storm, but there was no answer. My chest tightened, a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief flooding me all at once. I ran after his car for a few steps, waving my arms, my words tumbling out in a desperate plea for him to stop. "Clayton, please, I can't, just give me a ride," I shouted, my voice cracking. He looked over his shoulder, a smirk forming on his face, and said something I'll never forget. "Figure it out like an adult." Then his tires splashed through the puddles, sending water all over me as he sped off. I froze for a moment, drenched and humiliated, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. My own husband had left me there, alone, as though my suffering was nothing. I sank onto the wet bench at the bus stop, pulling my knees to my chest and letting the rain soak me completely. The cold wasn't just on my skin. It was deep inside, the feeling of being abandoned by someone I had trusted with my entire heart. I had faced arguments before, neglect and distance, but this was different. This was final. Standing there in the storm, shivering and exhausted, I felt like my world had collapsed around me. I was invisible, powerless, and completely alone. And then, as if fate itself had decided to intervene, a light appeared above the rain. At first, I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the storm and the headlights, but it grew brighter and closer. My cousin Ronan, flying a client nearby in his helicopter, had seen me from above. He maneuvered carefully, landing near the bus stop without a single hesitation. In moments, he had opened the door, and I felt the warmth of dry air and shelter as he helped me inside. I couldn't stop staring, the contrast so stark that it took my breath away. Clayton had left me to suffer in the rain, but Ronan had appeared like an answer to a silent prayer. I watched the storm fade beneath me as the helicopter rose into the sky. The noise of the rain was replaced by the steady hum of the rotors, and for the first time that night, I felt safe. I realized how quickly everything could change, how someone else could step in to rescue you when the person you relied on the most failed you. The humiliation, the cold, the loneliness, it all stayed behind on the wet asphalt as I lifted above it, literally and figuratively. In that moment, suspended over the storm, I understood something crucial. The world I thought I had depended on could fail me, but there was still a chance to rise above it. Clayton's cruelty had shown me my lowest point, and Ronan's unexpected arrival had given me a glimpse of what freedom and support could feel like. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, I realized I wasn't trapped in it anymore. I was being lifted, carried, and protected, and I knew that from this moment forward, my life would never be the same. After the helicopter lifted me away from the storm, Ronan held me as I shivered and cried, letting the fear and humiliation pour out of me. He didn't judge or scold. He just listened, letting me speak the words I hadn't been able to say aloud for months. Finally, he looked me in the eyes and said something I couldn't ignore. "Madeline, you need to see the truth. Clayton doesn't respect you. He doesn't love you the way you think he does." At first, I shook my head, refusing to believe it. I wanted to cling to the memory of the man I had married, the one who had made promises of love and partnership. But his words planted a seed that grew quickly, making me question everything I had taken for granted. That night, back in the safety of my cousin's home, I started paying attention to the things I had been ignoring for so long. I checked our bank statements, emails, and messages, looking for small inconsistencies, and soon, patterns began to emerge. Large sums of money had been withdrawn and transferred to unknown accounts. I traced some of it to a fancy apartment and luxury gifts. When I finally found the messages between Clayton and a young coworker named Savannah, my stomach dropped. The texts were flirty, intimate, and impossible to misread. There was no denying it. He was having an affair, and he had been using our shared money to fund it. Every detail I uncovered cut deeper. Vacation bookings, expensive dinners, gifts sent to Savannah under Clayton's name. All of it confirmed that he had been living a double life, and I had been left in the dark. The man I had trusted, the person I had devoted myself to, had been planning a secret life behind my back. Grief hit me like a physical weight, but it was quickly followed by something colder: clarity. The tears eventually dried, and what replaced them was a sharp focus. I couldn't change what had been done, but I could control what I would do next. I realized that my life with Clayton had been built on lies, and the more I discovered, the clearer it became that I deserved better than this betrayal. My sadness transformed into a quiet determination. I would not be a victim any longer. The humiliation, the deceit, the endless nights of wondering and hoping, they would no longer have power over me. I needed a plan, something decisive, something that would ensure I regained control over my life and my future. Ronan stayed by my side, offering support and guidance, reminding me of my own strength. With his encouragement, I began organizing the evidence, keeping records of the money transfers, screenshots of messages, and all the proof I could gather. Each piece of information strengthened my resolve. The man who had left me standing in the storm thought he could humiliate me and move on, but I was quietly preparing to turn the tables. By the time I went to sleep that night, grief had been replaced by focus. I wasn't just hurting anymore, I was ready. Clayton's betrayal had exposed the truth, and I had decided that I would not let it define me. Instead, it would be the catalyst for change. Every lie he had told, every secret he had kept, would fuel my determination to rise above him, to reclaim my dignity, and to take back the life that he had tried to steal. The storm he left me in had been the beginning of my awakening, and now I was ready to act. After discovering Clayton's betrayal, I realized I couldn't rush blindly into anything. I needed a plan, a way to reclaim control over my life without giving him the chance to hurt me further. Ronan stayed close, offering his steady presence and reminding me that I didn't deserve the pain Clayton had caused. One evening, I invited my childhood friend Elena over. She had always known me before marriage, before compromise, and her words were a balm to my battered confidence. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You deserve someone who sees your worth. Don't let him make you feel small." Her support, combined with Ronan's encouragement, gave me the courage to move from shock to action. The first step was gathering evidence. I quietly started collecting everything I could find: bank statements, emails, messages, and photos that proved Clayton's affair and financial manipulation. Every document I secured built a clearer picture of his lies. I contacted a lawyer in secret, explaining the situation without revealing too much at first, just enough to prepare myself for the legal side of leaving him. I knew that this had to be precise and strategic. Any misstep could allow him to minimize or hide his wrongdoing, and I couldn't take that risk. While planning, I had to continue appearing as if nothing had changed. At home, I played the part of the obedient, unaware wife, keeping my emotions contained and my actions ordinary. Clayton had no idea that I was quietly taking control of every detail of our finances and gathering proof of his deceit. Acting calm and submissive was difficult, but necessary. He needed to stay comfortable in his illusion so I could strike decisively when the time came. The more I investigated, the more I understood the extent of his manipulation. Clayton had built a carefully constructed life for himself, hiding the truth while projecting success and respectability. But behind that facade, he had squandered our joint money on luxuries for Savannah, kept secrets from me, and treated our marriage as a performance rather than a partnership. It was clear to me that leaving him wasn't enough. I needed to dismantle the world he had built on lies, to make sure he could no longer continue without consequence. Ronan and Elena became my sounding board and my shield. We discussed every move, weighing risks and timing. They reminded me that revenge didn't mean recklessness. It meant taking control, reclaiming my dignity, and ensuring justice for myself. Every plan, every decision was aimed at regaining what Clayton had stolen: my trust, my peace, and the life I deserved. By the end of those weeks, I had mapped out a clear strategy. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was exposing a man who had betrayed trust at every level, showing him that manipulation and deceit had consequences. I had transformed my grief into focus, and every document, every screenshot, every financial record became a weapon in my hands. I knew the day would come when Clayton would face the truth, and I wanted it to be complete, undeniable, and final. In the meantime, I kept smiling, kept pretending, and kept collecting the proof. While Clayton lived in ignorance of my resolve, I prepared for the moment when the empire he had built on lies would crumble. The quiet patience, the careful strategy, and the unwavering support of Ronan and Elena made me stronger than I had ever been. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about justice, control, and finally reclaiming the life Clayton had tried to ruin. The night of Clayton's promotion party arrived, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and calm determination. For months, I had gathered every piece of evidence, planned every step, and rehearsed the moment in my mind. Now it was time. The ballroom was crowded with his colleagues, clients, and of course Savannah, who looked radiant and unaware that her carefully hidden affair was about to be exposed. Clayton moved through the room confidently, shaking hands and smiling, completely oblivious to what was coming. I followed him quietly, blending in as I had for months, pretending everything was normal, keeping the secret that would soon shatter his carefully constructed world. I waited until the moment was perfect. Clayton had just given a short speech about hard work, loyalty, and success. Everyone was clapping, and Savannah was beaming at him. I stepped forward, my voice steady, holding my phone with the messages, emails, and proof I had collected over weeks. I called out to him, and the room fell silent. "Clayton, I think everyone deserves to know the truth," I said, keeping my gaze on him. I began showing the evidence, messages between him and Savannah, photos, receipts, and bank records that proved he had been hiding a life from everyone. The reaction was immediate. His colleagues froze, their expressions shifting from surprise to disbelief. Savannah's face turned pale, her confident smile replaced by shock and anger. She stormed out without a word, leaving a stunned silence behind her. Clayton opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The smug, untouchable man who had walked into the room with pride now looked small, exposed, and powerless. All the control he thought he had was gone in an instant. I didn't stop there. I stepped closer and handed him a thick envelope. "These are the divorce papers, Clayton," I said calmly. "Consider this the end of everything you've been hiding from me." His eyes widened, and I could see the shock and disbelief, but I felt nothing but clarity. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret he had thought he could keep was now laid bare for everyone to see. He had tried to humiliate me, manipulate me, and keep his affair hidden, but the tables had turned completely. The room buzzed with whispers and murmurs as people processed what had just happened. Some colleagues avoided him, some whispered to each other, and I could see the weight of embarrassment pressing down on him. Clayton, who had once controlled every situation, now had no control at all. I walked away from him calmly, feeling the power and freedom of someone who had faced betrayal and refused to be a victim. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I simply let the truth speak for itself. For the first time in months, I felt an incredible sense of relief. The humiliation, the lies, the manipulation, all of it had been confronted and defeated. I had waited, planned carefully, and now Clayton was paying the price for every choice he had made. Walking out of that room, I held my head high, knowing that this moment marked a turning point. The man who had tried to control my life was exposed for what he truly was, and I had reclaimed my dignity in front of everyone who mattered. That night, I didn't just end a marriage. I ended a chapter of betrayal, lies, and emotional manipulation. I had stepped into the light with the truth in my hands, and Clayton was left to face the consequences alone. The moment was both an ending and a beginning, a declaration that I would never allow myself to be silenced or deceived again. After the party, I focused entirely on reclaiming my life. With the lawyer's guidance, I carefully reviewed every account, document, and contract connected to our marriage. Clayton had always been careless when it came to details, confident that nothing could touch him, and I planned to use that to my advantage. Step by step, I ensured that the assets we had built together, including our home and savings, would be protected and transferred under my name. Every move was deliberate, calculated, and designed to give me control over what he had tried to take from me. Clayton, as usual, underestimated me. He signed papers without reading, assuming that the routine would be like all the others, that no one could outsmart him. I watched quietly as he handed over access to accounts, investments, and property, believing he was still in charge. In reality, I was the one steering the course of our lives now. The man who had tried to dominate, manipulate, and deceive was blinded by arrogance, and I turned that against him without confrontation or chaos. As the weeks passed, the consequences of his actions became clear. Savannah, once dazzled by his charm and gifts, left when she realized there would be no more luxuries to sustain her loyalty. She had only ever been interested in what he could give, and when that disappeared, so did she. Clayton was left isolated, stripped of the illusions that had made him feel untouchable. The relationships he had built on lies and selfishness crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in a way I had never been. I didn't gloat or boast, but I felt a quiet satisfaction. Everything he had thought would protect him, money, status, and manipulation, was gone, and I had done nothing more than follow the path of truth and preparation. I had taken the power he thought he owned and redirected it, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. I needed to survive, to thrive, and to reclaim the life that Clayton had tried to control. It was a strange kind of peace, watching the man who had caused me so much pain stumble through the consequences of his choices. He was broke, humiliated, and alone, and there was no one left to shield him from the reality he had created. For the first time in months, I felt free from fear, free from manipulation, and free from the constant stress that had dominated my days. My home, my savings, and my independence were intact, and they belonged to me entirely. More than the financial gain, it was the sense of control that mattered most. Clayton had relied on arrogance, deceit, and selfishness, but I had relied on patience, strategy, and clarity. The contrast was striking, and I felt stronger for having endured it. I had turned betrayal into a lesson and manipulation into an opportunity to reclaim my dignity. In the end, the man who had left me standing in the storm, who had lied, cheated, and dismissed my worth, was powerless. Meanwhile, I had rebuilt everything he had tried to take, not just for survival, but to prove to myself that I could rise above the chaos. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine, asserting my independence, and showing that no one could define my worth but me. The storm was over, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my life. Months had passed since the stormy night that had marked the end of my old life. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, learning to trust my instincts and take control of my own happiness. My home was mine, my finances were secure, and I felt a strength I hadn't known I possessed. One bright afternoon, Ronan invited me to join him for a flight in his helicopter again. This time, there was no emergency, no fear, only a sense of celebration. I climbed into the seat beside him, the hum of the rotors filling the air, and I felt a thrill of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. As we lifted off, the city spread out below me, buildings glinting in the sunlight, streets winding like threads beneath the sky. The wind rushed past, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and let myself breathe fully, unburdened by the weight of betrayal and manipulation that had once anchored me. I thought back to that bus stop, the rain drenching me, the humiliation and fear I had felt as Clayton drove away. The memory was sharp, but it no longer held power over me. I had climbed out of that darkness and discovered strength I never knew existed. Flying above the world, I felt the symbolism of the moment deeply. Just as the helicopter lifted me above the city, I had lifted myself above the storm of lies, deceit, and emotional abuse. The distance from the ground mirrored the emotional space I had created for myself, a space where I was free from fear, free from manipulation, and free from anyone who tried to define my worth. The wind against my face felt like the past being blown away, replaced with clarity and a sense of triumph. Ronan glanced at me and smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of what we both knew, that this flight wasn't just a ride, but a celebration of resilience. I no longer felt the need to cling to anyone's approval or validation. I had faced betrayal, exposed the lies, and reclaimed everything Clayton had tried to control. The helicopter's ascent was a mirror of my own rise, a tangible reminder that liberation was possible even after the deepest hurt. Looking down at the city below, I felt a mixture of gratitude and determination. Gratitude for the people who had supported me, for my own courage, and for the opportunity to start anew. Determination because I now knew that my future would be shaped by my choices alone, unclouded by anyone else's manipulation. Every turn of the rotor blades, every shift in altitude, reinforced the reality that I had survived and had grown stronger from the experience. By the time we circled back toward the landing, I realized that leaving Clayton had been the best decision I could have made. What had once seemed like tragedy, being abandoned, humiliated, and betrayed, was actually the start of my freedom. I had turned pain into power, fear into clarity, and betrayal into a chance to define my own life. The storm that had threatened to consume me no longer existed. It was behind me, beneath me, and I was soaring above it, fully alive and entirely in control of my destiny. In that moment, high above the world, I understood the truth completely. Leaving Clayton was not an ending, it was liberation. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, feeling the exhilaration of freedom in every fiber of my being. Time had passed, and life had settled into a rhythm that I controlled completely. Clayton had faded from the world I now inhabited. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was working a low-paying job, struggling to maintain the lifestyle he had once flaunted. At first, part of me felt a flicker of pity, but it quickly dissolved into a quiet indifference. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. I was no longer the woman who depended on his validation or tolerated his lies. One afternoon, I saw him on the street, standing there as if hoping I would stop and listen. He called my name, but I didn't respond. I didn't even glance in his direction. His face fell as I walked past him, composed and confident, feeling nothing but a calm assurance. The man who had once held power over my life now looked small, diminished by his own mistakes, while I continued forward unshaken and free. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, not born from malice, but from the knowledge that I had risen above the chaos he had created. Later, I met Ronan again and climbed into his helicopter. This time, there was no rescue needed, only the pure joy of freedom and accomplishment. As we lifted into the air, I glanced down and saw Clayton far below, his figure small and fading, a reminder of a past I had fully left behind. The city stretched out beneath us, endless and bright, and I felt a lightness I had never known before. Every memory of betrayal, every hurtful word and action, had been transformed into strength and clarity. Hovering above the world, I realized how far I had come. I had taken back everything he tried to take from me, my dignity, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. There was no anger left, only a firm certainty that I would never allow anyone to hold me back again. The helicopter's ascent mirrored the rise I had made in my own life, rising above fear, pain, and manipulation. As the wind rushed past, I made a promise to myself. I would never beg for love or validation again. From now on, I would only rise above those who tried to break me. Clayton's presence, once a shadow over my life, had disappeared completely, leaving only the space I had claimed for myself. I was free, stronger, and entirely in control, looking forward to a future defined by my own choices and my own power. Do you think I did the right thing by leaving Clayton and taking back control of my life? Or should I have given him another chance? I'm really curious to hear what you think, so let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of them.